Hello and welcome to another Delboy's Gaming History. I decided a short time back to do a little sort of like series of my gaming history um, and explain a little bit about how I discovered the game, why the game was fun for me, and sort of give a little bit of a background of the history of what was going on in my life in that year, um, and sort of like list some of the fun things that I liked, along with some news which was prominent at the time, probably meant something to me, but also mix in definitely news articles that the world knew about. Um, so just to give a little bit of background and what's going to be going on in this video, I'll try and put up a few little prompts. So over here, I'm going to be putting up the attract screen for the actual game that we're going to be discussing. Some cue cards that will explain a lot about the detail of the arcade machine and some background, and then anything prominent about the news or what was going on will be down in this corner. So if we want to progress, and you haven't known already, the year this time is 1980, and the game is the arcade version of Pac-Man. So let's talk a little bit about 1980. So in this particular year, the machines, computers or consoles that were in my possession were the Atari VCS or 2600, the ZX80 computer, and the Atari 800 computer. This is still very, very early electronics in my life, and I am not a teenager yet. So I felt that I was a very lucky boy, I dare say, in this particular year. I was now in my last year of primary school, and it's nice to think back a little bit about my primary school because it was so different to secondary school, which I remember far more about because I remember my teenage years more than my first 10 or 11 years of my life. But primary school always started for me with going into roll call. Then we had an assembly. In that assembly, the whole of the school was addressed on what was going on. We sang school hymns. Those was a bit weird because that never happened at secondary school, but we were called into assembly by some classical music, marched sort of like into a big hall, and then we sang songs like Hand Me Down My Silver Trumpet, Gabriel, and other sort of like children's hymns that weren't really hymns that you'd come across in a church. We all had house colours in primary school. My colour was blue, and they all had a sort of like little chants like yellow, yellows, eat marshmallows, reds, reds, wet their beds, all of that sort of stuff. I remember all of these little chants. I don't know why they came about or who made them up. But other things that I remember about primary school was walking on the left. You couldn't walk anywhere else. There were hall monitors that basically monitored the halls to make sure that you're in class and not delinquishing somewhere where you shouldn't be. And I also remember that we had set lunch. That was a bit weird as well because in the secondary school we ordered what we wanted, but in primary school we had set lunches. So I remember on Friday it was always Fish Friday, and I hate fish. So it was a day that I wasn't looking forward to. And some of the soup that they served would be not nice soup, like pea, there'd be like pea soup. It wouldn't be like oxtail or tomato. And I remember one of my friends showed me something that amazed me. He managed to balance his spoon on the top of this soup. And I thought it was because of the thickness. What he actually did was he put vinegar, poured vinegar all into his soup, and then when he put his spoon on the top of the soup, because of this film, the spoon rested on top. I did that once, and I got caught, and I was forced to eat the soup as it was, and it was horrible, absolutely disgusting. But enough about that. We now cover some subjects that I think everybody can relate to a little bit, and that will be the films, the toys, and the music, really, that were going on in 1980. So some of the films that I went to see, and remember, I was not a teenager yet, so I could not see a lot of good films that were out this year. And I was still going also to film club, so film club would show films that were already out, from the 70s, so those won't be mentioned. But the films that were new of this year that I remember seeing were Meteor, Kramer versus Kramer, Elephant Man, Hawk the Slayer, The Mirror Cracked, The Sea Wolves, Airplane, which I found hilarious, and I saw that a couple of times, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, which I saw lots of times, Rocky 2, and Mission Galactica. But as I was mentioning, there were lots of other films that were fantastic that I just couldn't see, which I have obviously seen in my adult life, and actually still managed to see a little bit later on video, because the certification really didn't mean anything. I was still able to see them. So the films that I'm talking about are things like 10, Caligula, Shining, Amityville Horror, Friday the 13th, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Dressed to Kill, and Fame. All of those films were beyond the normal PG rating at the time. Now, when it comes to music, I was still listening to soundtracks and electronic music. That started a lot earlier than 1980. I remember my first double album really was War of the Worlds, and that's in the mid to late 1970s. So that's where soundtrack and electronic music sort of like started for me. But stuff that I was listening to now tended to be singles mostly. Something that I'd listen to that I'd then go out and buy, rather than buying vinyl albums, because I just couldn't afford them. So the bands and music that I was listening to were things like Blondie, Pink Floyd, because I remember Another Brick in the Wall, Dexys Midnight Runners, ELO, because I really loved the Xanadu track, and always remember Don Bluth's animation in that film. Don't Walk Away, I think, is the track. David Bowie, ABBA, Police, Gary Newman, Kate Bush, Sheena Easton was quite big at this time, Marty Webb, The Pretenders, Sky, which I think were on their second album at this particular time, and then of course The Vapors. Turning Japanese was a track that I remember playing lots and lots of times. Something about that track made me play it over and over again. And then literally because of TV and that sort of stuff, I was listening to things like Dennis Waterman's Minder theme. I remember going out and buying the single of that and sort of like being ridiculed and joked upon for liking something so benign and non-poppy, if you see what I mean. But in the summer, which was a very important time for me because I had lots of time to myself, and I was able to spend it a little bit more in my street where a couple of my friends lived. We would go riding around on our bikes, but the toys that come to mind that I played the most during this period were the Rubik's Cube. That was very big. I remember getting one of those in the summer. Couldn't do hardly anything with it. I then found out that there was a book called The Solution to the Rubik's Cube. Read it, still didn't understand it. But by the end of 1980, I was able to do the top face. And I remember being able to do the top edge and the middle edge all correct and in the right places. And I just never ever could do the bottom edge and the bottom. But I have to say the book helped me sort of. It made me think more three-dimensionally, like when I move a face round to one side and then turn it, that I'd be altering two or three specific faces with that move, depending on which side I was manipulating and which part I was moving. And then there was another biggie that, although I had those lovely consoles, I remember the handheld that blew me away at the time was called the MB Microvision. Now, I'll put a picture up and it's down there now. The MB Microvision was a cartridge-based handheld LED screen game system. And my Atari system at the time was really the only cartridge system I had. The Atari 800, I was loading things in by tape at that particular time. But the ability to have something in your hand, you bought a cartridge, you took the cartridge off, you slid the new cartridge in, and you had a different game, was brilliant. They were very, very simplified. They were breakout clones and bowling clones. But it just amazed me how much fun I had with that. And in my street, nobody had got this particular system yet. I do remember that I think before this time I had got some of those handheld arcade machines like Astro Wars, etc. But the MB Microvision with its interchangeable system just blew me away. So just before we get to the crux of the gameplay and Pac-Man, let's talk about some of the events that happened in 1980. These are events that I remember, and some of them were just very prominent and known as for this particular year. So the very first thing that happened in this particular year, 1980, there was a nationwide strike at the British Steel Corporation over pay. Now, this went on for quite some time. So the important dates were on the 2nd of January, there was the strike. On the 14th of February, Margaret Thatcher decided to cut the benefits of those that were striking by half to force them into going back to work. On the 17th of February, British Steel announced that there were 11,000 jobs that were then going to be axed to keep the company going. And then the steel workers' strike came to an end on the 1st of April with those 11,000 jobs going. After those particular events, Margaret Thatcher's, who was our Prime Minister, luck was getting really, really worse, because the inflation for the year rose to 21.8%, which is a huge percentage, and unemployment was announced at being 1.6 million, which was at that particular point, a post-war high. So Margaret Thatcher was not having a great year. But on the 20th of January, just going back to the beginning, a British record was set for a TV audience watching a film, where James Bond's Live and Let Die was broadcast for the first time, and 23.5 million UK residents watched it on that particular evening. That's a huge figure for a film. We've seen figures like that before at Christmas and for individual events, sporting events, but not for films. Now, the next big thing that was sort of going on in 1980 was we had our Winter Olympics. So between the 14th and the 23rd at Lake Placid, New York, the Winter Olympics were held. And we, in the UK, won one gold medal, Robin Cousins. But it wasn't the end of the Olympics, because there was also the Olympics to be held in Moscow that year. The government had decided that no British sports person would be attending that event, but the British Olympic Committee overruled that and decided we were going to send people from Britain to the Olympics, and that did occur. There was another couple of important things that happened this year that would mean something to us, especially if you're a car owner, because two important cars were launched. There was the Vauxhall Astra Mark 1, and Ford released the Mark III version of the Escort. Now those would basically two cars that would play up against each other because they got the most sales over the next couple of years for those particular models. Other things that I remember about that year was that we had, as a country, we didn't have too many theme parks, but Alton Towers opened on the 4th of April of this year. And I didn't actually get to go to Alton Towers opening, but I did go to it later on in my life. I think it was something like 1983-4 when I went to Alton Towers. This was a major event because it was a stately home which now had hundreds of rides. And one of the rides that us as kiddies wanted to go on was the corkscrew. It was the first roller coaster ride that had a double corkscrew in it in Europe. Obviously America's had much bigger rides, but for us it was a big event. And then of course on the 5th of May the whole world saw the SAS storm the Iranian embassy building. It was a very big news event. I remember at the time not understanding what was going on, but I remember seeing flames coming out of the side of the building. I saw people dressed in black garb going in through the windows, and then seeing all the paper pictures afterwards in the newspapers. It was a massive thing. Now, one I don't remember too much of, but one I sometimes get confused over, is on the 10th of July, the Alexandra Palace burnt down. And I always seem to get these two mixed up, the Alexandra Palace and the Crystal Palace. They're both built for sort of a similar thing. The Crystal Palace burnt down just before the war, I believe, and was built at the turn of the century as a homage to all things science related. Aristocrats would turn up to go to the Crystal Palace and see modern technology like inside toilets being demonstrated that were going to benefit us. The Alexandra Palace was built as the People's Palace. Same sort of thing, only the more normal sort of like everyday people would be able to go to that particular building. For years and years, the BBC broadcast from that particular building, but in this particular year, it burned, and now it's a listed building. I believe it was renovated. And then finally, just want to mention that the sad passing of John Lennon, who on the 8th of December had his life cut short by a gunman outside his home. This was a shot that was heard around the world, and thousands of fans in Liverpool around about the 14th of December held a 10-minute vigil for John Lennon. So again, we end on a sad note for 1980. So enough about that. Well, let's talk about Pac-Man. So I'd have seen Pac-Man either on holiday or at the bus cafe or the travelling fair. In this particular instance, it was the cafe. So yay to the cafe again. And because it was the cafe, and because I was always with my nan or some family member when I was at the bus shelter, I would have time to go away and look at people playing the games before I managed to get a go on it myself. Pac-Man was... What could we say about Pac-Man? Pac-Man is iconic. Pac-Man is a craze, and you could see sort of why, because even up to that point, I'd noticed that mostly large boys or men were playing on these machines, and I hardly saw any mothers or girls playing on these machines. But in this particular instance in the cafe, I did notice now a few little girls that were having their milkshakes with their mothers were playing this game. But what was coming to my mind when I saw it, well, I never really understood the game. I know it's very simplistically, you can say a big yellow blob moves around a maze eating dots while being chased by ghosts. But things that came into my mind when I first saw it was, why is the maze a top view, but all of the enemies that I'm seeing going around a side view? If it was a top view, surely you wouldn't see their eyes, and yet you could. Why does a power pill allow the death or a capture of a dead thing? Because it's a ghost, isn't it? It means it's dead. And because it's dead, why can't they go through walls? Every ghost story I'd ever read, ghosts were able to go through walls. In fact, one of the TV programs I remember seeing in the 70s, which was Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, featured a ghost called Marty, and he went through walls. So why is it that these ghosts can't? All sorts of those sort of questions came into my head. But that is my life with Pac-Man. Pac-Man was never my ultimate fave game, but it was so radically different. It was probably my most played game in 1980, and one that I couldn't wait to get a home version of. So now we've got all of that out the way. Um, we'll move all of that stuff from all the corners. I think it's about time that we saw me playing badly Pac-Man. I love this game. I know it's very, very simple. I know people can go for thousands and thousands in their scores and go through waves and waves. I love the game. I've seen many incarnations of it, but don't generally come back to the game in its very first incarnation, which is Pac-Man slash Puckman, as it's known in Japan. So enough of my waffle. Let's see me playing it really badly, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks very much. Bye.
Hello and welcome to the gameplay element of this video. So by now you've looked and seen what 1980 has to offer, and this was one particular game that I did like to play in the arcades. It's a simple little maze game. Um, there you will find that if you look now, 40 years plus on, um, most people have now analyzed the patterns, and you can work and complete this game fairly easy. I believe there are 3 patterns to learn, and there is a safe area on later screens where the ghosts will not detect you. But my opinion of this game is it's supposed to be fun, and the way that you play this game is to discover for yourself um, areas that you can exploit, and above all, have fun in the game. Now, I've seen it on and off in arcades. It does turn up now and again. Um, but I haven't played it in the arcades for 20 plus years. It's been on MAME since pretty much nearly the beginning, and I've come back to it now and again. But the nice thing about Pac-Man is it has evolved, and there have been other versions: Miss Pac-Man, Pac-Land, Pac-Mania, and of course, as each of those arcade versions evolved, home versions uh, became better and better as well. So, really, it's one of those ones where the classic reigns supreme, but generally, you probably won't go back to it if you've been away for it for a long time, only just purely for the nostalgia aspect of it. From my point of view, then, I don't expect to get very far in it, possibly 3 screens, something like that. But we'll have a go. You're going to see some very bad gameplay. And just remember, it's all about the fun. So we'll put a coin in. There we go. And press the one player button. And let's see what I can do, which won't be a lot. As you can see, I've eaten things like power pellets well too early, and you know, you just learn that you should only use those if you really, really need to. I don't learn my lessons very much, really, to be quite honest. I just try and hoover up the dots, get the ghost if I can. Oh, should have gone up there. Yeah. Let's just see if I can hoover up these dots. Get a ghost or two. There we go. So I'm doing very poorly, and I'm sure you'll do a hell of a lot better than me. Okay. It's very much a little bit of a beater, if you see what I mean, in regards to, can I outfox these ghosts by going around a little bit more and eating a few more dots without having to use that power pill. And that's the fun aspect. That's all you need to know, really, in regards to, can you hold your breath? And there we are. Amazingly, got to the end of the second screen. Oh, and then of course you have these little intervals, which are quite nice. I'm not quite sure how many there are, but there is a kill screen at 256 levels, I believe. And when that occurs, the screen fills with garbage, and basically you can't really continue much more. You see, I've used my power pills far too early. And I'm not turning very well either. Oh, well, 8,790. Not too bad. Should we have one more go? Why not? Quite fast games. See if I can last a bit longer without eating a power pill. Oh, that was stupid of me. Look at that. Go round. I think it shows a coder's real talent in designing the mazes, where you've got these little troughs where you've got to go in, and those ones can really eat you up if you don't get them. Nearly on. Let me do this a little bit differently this time. Oh, right, okay, he comes down pretty fast. Ugh. That was bad. But it brings back lots of memories, because it's such an early game that basically I played this on home versions so much because it was so cloned. And from that point of view, I didn't have to put lots and lots of coins in to actually get to play on the game. They may have been cheap versions. They may have been versions that weren't quite exactly the same. There's a famous story about the Atari 2600 version, but you got the essence of it. You maneuvered a character. It was eating darts. There were power pills, and basically all of them potentially were fun. Um, there's obviously bad ones out there, but I'm quite happy with that. I'm not, like I say, a big, huge uh, Pac-Man fan where I've come back to it every year and play it religiously. It's nice that we're close to Halloween and I've put in a game that's got ghosts in it. Um, and really happy with that. And I hope you've enjoyed the video. We're now moving quite nicely, and there's bound sure to be a few more in the weeks to come. So I hope you stay with it. Thanks very much and see you on the next one. Bye bye.